Sometimes the story of a nation's dignity begins with a single insult. It happened on an ordinary winter afternoon in New York City, inside a hotel so proud of its reputation, it forgot why it existed. The Lexington Crown Hotel in Midtown Manhattan was the kind of place where crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above marble floors, and where espresso cost more than an honest day's labor. The air smelled of polished wood and money. Everything gleamed except the people paid to make it gleam. That was where Andrew and Grace Matthews, married 50 years, entered quietly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Andrew wore a gray suit, old, but pressed to perfection. His shoes showed years of care, leather softened by time, not luxury. Grace walked beside him in a simple navy dress, carrying a small handmade brooch shaped like a leaf. She touched her husband's arm as they took in the room, two figures of quiet grace against a sea of indifference. They looked, to anyone else, like an elderly couple from another era. To the staff, they looked like a mistake. Behind the front desk stood Ryan Morrell, 28 years old, eyes sharp and restless. His tie was perfect, his smile practiced, but his glance just one flicker betrayed judgment. He had seen enough high-end clients to read wealth like a barcode, and what he read in the Matthewses did not add up. Andrew stepped forward, calm, polite. "Good afternoon," he said. "We'd like to discuss reserving one of your event halls." Ryan didn't look up from the computer. "For what purpose, sir?" Andrew smiled. "A gathering. Something important." Ryan's tone stayed flat. "What kind of gathering? A birthday? A club meeting?" Grace answered softly. "It's a vote, for a foundation project." Ryan raised one eyebrow. "And your budget?" Andrew's answer was gentle. "We'll consider what fits the spirit of the event." Ryan's smirk was microscopic but lethal. "Understood," he said, as if humoring a child. He could not hide the impatience in his voice. Every second he spent on them was a second not spent with someone who tipped in hundreds. His eyes dropped to Andrew's shoes, then to the faded leather folder in the older man's hands. "Our venues start at a fairly premium rate," he said. "It may not be ideal for smaller, social functions." Grace glanced around. The chandeliers reflected in her eyes like stars she was no longer allowed to touch. "It's a beautiful place," she whispered. Andrew nodded. "It is." Ryan, still typing, muttered, "It's certainly not for everyone." At that moment, Mia Sanchez, a junior associate newly hired at 23, stepped out from behind the concierge stand. She had overheard the tone, the condescension that cut between words like thin ice. Her instinct told her something was wrong. Ryan noticed her and frowned. "Mia, do you need something?" She hesitated. "Just making sure our guests are being helped properly." His voice snapped back. "They are. Go check the deliveries." The older couple caught the exchange. Grace smiled faintly at Mia, as if to reassure her. But something deeper moved beneath that calm. Andrew had spent his life surrounded by men who mistook wealth for worth. He had learned long ago that arrogance ages faster than humility. Still, even he felt the sting. Ryan finally looked up. "I can let you see a brochure, but just so you know, the Crown tends to host corporate clients. Charity events, product launches, that sort of thing. For private functions, there's a community center about 10 blocks east that might be more flexible." Grace's hand tightened slightly on Andrew's sleeve. He simply said, "Thank you for your honesty." From across the lobby, a new sound, heavy shoes clicking across marble, announced Calvin Isham, the hotel manager. Mid-40s, tall, flawless suit, eyes like glass. His presence changed the air around him. People adjusted posture when he entered. "What seems to be the issue?" Calvin asked smoothly. Ryan replied quickly. "A couple inquiring about a room rental, possibly a small event, limited budget." Calvin gave a slow, polite smile toward the Matthewses, a smile trained to hide judgment. "Good afternoon. How can we assist you?" Andrew repeated the request. A hall for a decision meeting, something dignified, intimate. Calvin's reply came coated in courtesy, but laced with dismissal. "We appreciate your interest, sir. However, our event spaces are reserved for large-scale corporate or sponsored affairs. I would hate for you to find the rates discouraging." Grace understood the subtext instantly. "You mean too expensive?" Calvin kept smiling. "I mean exclusive, and it is my duty to protect that standard." The words fell like frost. Around them, the music continued, polite and distant. No one intervened. No one needed to. The humiliation was quiet enough to stay respectable. Mia stood a few feet away, heart pounding. Her training told her to stay silent. Her conscience screamed otherwise. She stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Isham, maybe we could—" He cut her off without looking. "Miss Sanchez, please attend to the VIP lounge." Grace lowered her gaze. Andrew turned slightly toward Mia and nodded once a silent thank you. Calvin clasped his hands behind his back. "Now then, sir, ma'am, perhaps a more casual venue might suit your purposes. There's a lovely senior center across the river with open halls." Andrew interrupted, his voice steady. "We'll consider it, but I'd like to know if your ballroom is available on the 12th of March. Calvin blinked. "The 12th? "Yes," Andrew said. "In the afternoon." Calvin's smile faltered. "That is when we host a corporate gala. Then it will be a fine day for decisions," Andrew replied. It was the first time his tone carried weight. Something about his composure unsettled the manager, an authority too calm to measure. Ryan leaned toward Calvin, whispering, "We should just tell them it's booked solid." Calvin nodded slightly. "I'm afraid that date is fully occupied," he said aloud. "Perhaps another facility might better reflect your goals." Andrew's eyes stayed on him for a long second. "I see," Grace whispered. "Let's not trouble them, dear." He smiled gently at her. "You're right. We've troubled them enough just by existing." As they turned to leave, Mia felt an ache that surprised her guilt mixed with anger. She wanted to stop them, to say something that would erase what had just happened, but Calvin's glare froze her where she stood. The couple walked slowly toward the glass doors, hand in hand. Outside, the city light bent around them like a halo. Calvin exhaled, relieved. "Let's keep that kind of traffic minimal from now on," he muttered. Ryan smirked. "Agreed." And yet, in the space they left behind, something lingered, something the chandeliers couldn't polish away. Because unknown to everyone in that lobby, the quiet man they had just dismissed wasn't another retiree. He was the architect of a national fund about to reshape the very economy that hotel depended on. And before the day ended, the Lexington Crown would learn what humility costs word by word, dollar by dollar, life by life. A deep engine growled outside the revolving doors, lower and slower than any town car it sound, the first warning that everything inside that hotel was about to change. The deep engine outside the revolving doors faded into the background hum of the city as the hotel returned to its rhythm of wealth. At the front desk, Ryan Morrell refocused on his computer screen, pretending the encounter never happened. To him, the elderly couple were already a forgotten tab in the browser of his day. But Mia Sanchez could not let it go. The look in the woman's eyes, the quiet, bruised dignity stayed with her like a weight she could not set down. A few minutes later, Calvin Isham reappeared at the desk, adjusting his cufflinks. He asked Ryan how the situation had been handled. Ryan smirked, proud of his efficiency. "They left," he said. "Tried to book a hall for some kind of senior meeting, probably underfunded. I suggested community options." Calvin nodded approvingly. "Good. We do not have time for symbolic gestures. This is the Lexington Crown, not a town lodge." Their words came out polished, civilized, but underneath lay something colder, an understanding that certain people, no matter how polite, simply did not belong. Mia lingered a few feet away, organizing forms she no longer saw. She wanted to speak, but could already hear the reprimand. Calvin turned to her anyway. "Miss Sanchez, take notes at the evening briefing, and next time, avoid engaging guests who are not in your service tier." The phrase struck her like static. "Not in your service tier." She forced a nod, hiding the flush on her face. "Understood, sir." But inside, she wondered what kind of company punished kindness as if it were a liability. Ryan, sensing her discomfort, whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "You're new, Mia. You'll learn. This job's about presentation, not charity." She stared at him. "And what about respect?" He laughed. "Respect doesn't pay the lease." It was meant as a joke, but the way he said it turned it into doctrine. In that lobby, money wasn't just currency, it was moral gravity, deciding who mattered and who didn't. Mia returned to her desk, her mind replaying the sound of Andrew's voice, soft but unwavering. "Then it will be a fine day for decisions." Who says something like that after being insulted? Not someone ordinary. Something about the way he carried himself had unsettled Calvin too, she was sure of it. But Calvin buried discomfort beneath arrogance, the way others buried guilt beneath work. By late afternoon, the crowd shifted again. Laughter, champagne flutes, and the rustle of designer coats filled the air. A wedding planner met with a groom's father to negotiate prices that could fund an entire public school art program. Calvin watched proudly from the mezzanine, the king of this artificial kingdom. Ryan stood at his post like a sentry guarding privilege. Mia just kept breathing, trying to remember why she'd taken this job. Her family in Queens had celebrated when she was hired. A real Manhattan hotel, her mother said, with benefits and insurance. But Mia had expected something else, a sense of purpose, maybe pride. Instead, she found a machine built to polish surfaces and ignore souls. Calvin glanced at his watch, then gestured for Ryan. "Be ready at 4, he said. "We're expecting a VIP from Temple Enterprises. Treat him like oxygen." Ryan nodded eagerly. "Understood." They both smiled in the kind of way people do when ambition outweighs self-awareness. Mia watched the revolving doors and thought about Andrew and Grace. She imagined them walking the cold streets, still holding hands, still carrying that worn folder no one had cared to open. Something about their composure had haunted her, the quiet certainty that they didn't need to shout to be heard. The elevator chimed, pulling her out of thought. Calvin straightened his jacket. "This is the kind of client who defines our quarter," he murmured. "Remember, appearances are everything." Then, with rehearsed grace, he moved toward the entrance. Outside, the sound of expensive tires against wet asphalt echoed like a warning. A sleek black SUV slid to a stop at the curb. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door with military precision. From inside emerged a sharply dressed man in his 40s, Temple Enterprises representative, eyes shielded behind mirrored glasses. Calvin's entire posture changed. He greeted the man with both hands and a bow of practiced sincerity. "Welcome, Mr. Temple. We've been expecting you." The contrast was grotesque. Minutes ago, that same marble floor had rejected humility. Now it bent itself for money. Mia stood frozen, the hypocrisy too vivid to ignore. As Calvin led the guest toward the VIP lounge, she looked back at the empty spot where Andrew and Grace had stood. It felt like a moral vacuum, a place where decency had been traded for decor. Ryan leaned toward her again. "Now that's a real client," he whispered. Mia didn't reply. Something inside her shifted. Maybe it was anger, maybe shame. But in that moment, she understood that silence was the first form of complicity. From the corner of her eye, she saw Calvin's reflection in the glass, a man who smiled only when someone could give him something. She thought of Grace's handmade brooch, delicate and priceless in a way Calvin would never recognize, and for the first time since joining the hotel, Mia felt disgust instead of pride. The front desk lights dimmed as evening approached, turning the marble gold. The day's ledger closed, the system updated, and Ryan's smirk returned. "Easy day," he said. Mia didn't answer. Because in her chest, something else was starting a quiet rebellion that would not stay buried. As the black SUV's door shut, and Calvin escorted his VIP toward the lounge, a second vehicle eased up to the curb, a vintage sedan, deep navy, its engine hummed steady as a heartbeat. Inside sat someone watching the hotel doors with purpose. The night was about to remember what the afternoon forgot. The navy sedan idled outside the Lexington Crown Hotel, its chrome trim catching the last pale gold of the winter sunset. Inside, the driver waited, reading from a sheet of paper printed with 2 names. Andrew and Grace Matthews. He was early. Inside the hotel, no one noticed him. They were too busy chasing bigger shadows, corporate accounts, influencers, and the next wealthy guest to flatter. Upstairs, Calvin Isham adjusted his tie in the mirror of the executive lounge. "This city respects presentation," he reminded himself. Down below, Ryan Morrell closed a deal for a bachelor party suite, congratulating himself on earning another small commission. Only Mia Sanchez kept glancing toward the doors, wondering if the couple from earlier had found another venue. She hoped so. The way Grace had smiled at her, grateful and forgiving, made her feel both proud and guilty. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the revolving doors turned again. Andrew and Grace stepped back into the lobby. They had returned. Their coats were dusted with snow. Grace carried the same folder. Andrew carried nothing but the quiet certainty that politeness can outlast pride. Ryan spotted them first and froze. "You've got to be kidding," he muttered. Calvin, noticing the shift in his posture, looked up from his phone. "What is it now?" Ryan leaned closer. "The same couple. They're back." Calvin's face twitched with annoyance. "Handle it." Ryan hesitated. "Sir, maybe you should handle it," Calvin repeated, turning away. Ryan walked to the counter, his smile stiff. "Welcome back. I thought we'd finished our conversation earlier." Andrew nodded politely. "We had, but I realized I hadn't properly thanked you for your time." He placed the folder gently on the counter. "And we'd like to proceed with our booking." Ryan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The 12th of March, Andrew said. "We'll take the ballroom." Ryan stifled a laugh. "Sir, perhaps I wasn't clear before. The ballroom rental begins at $50,000 for the afternoon." Andrew's tone remained even. "That's fine." Ryan froze. "You mean that's within your budget?" Andrew said, "That's fine." Grace smiled softly, watching her husband. There was no anger, no arrogance, just quiet certainty. Ryan glanced toward Calvin, who was watching from the mezzanine with folded arms. The manager descended the stairs slowly, every step echoing. "Is there a problem, Mr. Morel?" Ryan straightened. "No, sir. Just clarifying a misunderstanding." Calvin stopped beside the couple, his professional warmth barely masking irritation. "Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, as I mentioned earlier, our event spaces are typically reserved for large-scale corporate clients. We are very selective about partnerships that represent our brand." Andrew met his eyes. "You mean you prefer money that looks expensive?" Calvin's smile faltered. "I mean consistency." Grace spoke for the first time. "Then perhaps you'll appreciate what we're building." She opened the folder and slid a document forward, an embossed seal, an official letterhead, and several printed plans. The header read, "American Craft Heritage Trust Decision. Vote for Expansion." Calvin skimmed the title without absorbing it. "A trust?" he asked. "A non-profit organization?" Andrew nodded. "A national initiative to preserve traditional crafts, trade skills, and apprenticeship programs. We've spent years building partnerships across 22 states. This meeting finalizes our next chapter." Ryan leaned against the desk, unimpressed. "So, like a hobby group?" Andrew's eyes stayed kind but steady. "Like a movement." Calvin exchanged a look with Ryan that said everything. Small budget, big talk. "I see. And this movement, how many people are you expecting?" "A few dozen," Grace answered. "Maybe 50. Ryan's smirk returned. "Then you'll want the smaller conference room. It's more appropriate." Andrew shook his head. "No, we'll need the ballroom. Some of our partners prefer open space. They're used to building things, not fitting into corners." For the first time, Calvin felt a flicker of confusion. "And your budget is?" Andrew smiled. "Whatever is required to do it right." That confidence unsettled him. "Mr. Matthews," he said carefully, "events like that involve premium costs, security, catering, sound systems, decor." Andrew replied, "We've built houses from nothing. I think we can manage a meal." Behind them, a pair of businessmen laughed loudly as they checked in, oblivious to the tension. Grace turned to Mia, who stood near the desk pretending to organize papers. "Young lady," she said gently, "may I ask your opinion? Do you think this space feels alive or just polished?" Mia hesitated, glancing at her supervisors. "I think it feels quiet." Grace nodded. "That's what happens when money outgrows meaning." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, we can't hold bookings without payment." Andrew opened the folder again, pulling out a form of authorization. "Then charge the deposit." Ryan stared. The amount was typed clearly. "Retainer authorization up to $100,000. Calvin's heart skipped. "I beg your pardon?" Andrew folded his hands. "You heard correctly." For the first time, the hierarchy wavered. Ryan looked to Calvin. Calvin hesitated, pride wrestling with panic. "Mr. Matthews," he said carefully, "may I ask the nature of your organization's funding?" Andrew smiled faintly. "Private, public, and everything in between. Some dreams don't fit on one ledger." Before Calvin could respond, his phone buzzed an internal message from the concierge. Mr. Temple has arrived. He turned sharply to Ryan. Get the VIP lounge ready. Then to Andrew. Excuse me one moment. Important business. Without waiting for a reply, he pivoted away. Ryan followed, relieved to escape. Mia remained frozen. The couple stood there, untouched by the insult. Grace whispered, "He didn't even look at you." Andrew replied, "He looked exactly long enough to see what he wanted." Mia swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for how you've been treated," she said quietly. Grace smiled. "Don't be. Every wall needs a crack to let the light through," Andrew added. "And sometimes, kindness is the only tool that matters." The elevator dinged as Calvin and Ryan disappeared into the VIP lounge, leaving the lobby empty except for Mia and the couple. Outside, the night deepened, and the first snow began to fall. The sound was soft, but in it, Mia heard something she couldn't name, like a tide gathering strength. As the snow thickened, the glass doors opened once more, and a man stepped in from the cold, a tall figure in a long dark coat, the same man who had been waiting in the Navy sedan. His eyes locked on Andrew and Grace as if this meeting had been planned all along. The tall man in the dark coat stepped inside the Lexington Crown, shaking the snow from his shoulders. The moment his shoes touched the marble, the lobby changed. Conversation softened, staff straightened, and even the music seemed to quiet itself. He didn't look around to admire the chandeliers or the art. His attention went straight to Andrew and Grace Matthews. "You're early," Andrew said with a calm smile. The man nodded. Traffic was light. "Are we still on schedule?" "We are," Andrew replied. Grace adjusted her gloves, warmth in her voice. "Thank you for coming, Kenneth." Mia froze. "Kenneth?" There was something familiar about the name. Ryan and Calvin were still in the VIP lounge, unaware that a different kind of VIP had just entered. Kenneth Ford looked to be in his 70s, tall, silver hair, posture military straight. His face carried the calm authority of someone used to making billion-dollar decisions without ever raising his voice. He turned toward the front desk and said, "Is the ballroom available for inspection?" Mia's throat went dry. Yes, I believe it is." Kenneth smiled faintly. "Good. I'd like to see it." He turned back to Andrew. "You sure you want this place?" Andrew's tone was quiet but steady. Sometimes the right lesson requires the wrong room. The words carried more power than volume. Mia couldn't explain it, but it made the air around them feel heavier. Kenneth Ford, she remembered now, was the chairman of a national manufacturing group, often featured on television as a major donor to trade education. She had watched one of his interviews in college. "We don't need more followers," he'd said. "We need more makers." And now, he was standing here talking to the same couple her manager had just humiliated. Before she could process it, Calvin emerged from the VIP lounge, his voice already elevated with forced warmth. "Mr. Temple, it was an honor." Then he stopped mid-sentence, his eyes locking on Kenneth Ford. The color drained from his face. He knew that name too. Everyone in his industry did. Kenneth's company had financed multiple hotel expansions across the East Coast. Mr. Ford. "What a surprise," Calvin said, his voice shifting from power to panic in a single breath. Kenneth turned to him with a calm nod. "Mr. Isham, is it?" "Yes, sir," Calvin stammered. "We're honored. If we'd known you were visiting—" Kenneth's eyes moved from Calvin to the elderly couple beside him. "Then you would have treated my partners differently?" Calvin blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Andrew said quietly. "You heard him," Grace added softly. "Apparently kindness is a premium service." The silence that followed was unbearable. Ryan emerged behind Calvin, clueless to what he'd walked into. "Sir, the temple meeting." He stopped as his gaze met Kenneth's. Even he recognized the man from headlines. Calvin whispered, "Ryan, stop talking." Kenneth stepped closer, his voice still calm. "I came to see this place because my friends wanted to support it. They were considering hosting a national conference here, something that could have brought millions of dollars and the kind of attention this brand claims to deserve. But what I've heard so far," he paused, letting the words hang like thunder about to strike, "makes me wonder what exactly this brand stands for." Calvin's posture deflated. He tried to salvage his tone. "Mr. Ford, there must be a misunderstanding. We had no idea who they—" Kenneth cut him off, not with volume, but with precision. You didn't need to know who they were to show respect. Mia felt the words like a pulse through the room. She saw Ryan glance nervously at Calvin, the hierarchy crumbling in real time. Grace reached for Andrew's hand, not in fear but in reassurance. "You don't have to say more, Ken," she said softly. "People reveal themselves when money walks into the room." Kenneth exhaled slowly. "And what did they reveal today?" Andrew replied. "That price tags are easier to polish than souls." For a moment, no one spoke. The lobby, once a shrine to prestige, now felt small, almost claustrophobic. Guests nearby pretended to check their phones but listened with open fascination. Calvin's mind raced for a way out, for any escape from the humiliation unfolding in slow motion. He forced a smile. "Mr. Ford, please allow me to make amends. I'll have champagne brought out." "No," Kenneth said simply. "You'll listen." The authority in that one word froze Calvin mid-step. Ryan stepped back, his face paling. Even the pianist in the corner stopped playing. "Mr. and Mrs. Matthews," Kenneth said, turning back to them, "shall we proceed with the inspection?" Andrew nodded. "Let's." He glanced at Mia. "Would you mind showing us the ballroom, young lady?" Mia hesitated, then looked to Calvin. He said nothing. His silence was consent, born of fear. "Of course," she said. As they walked toward the grand hall, the older couple led, Kenneth a step behind, Mia at their side. The ballroom lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny suns, gold on crystal. It was magnificent, an empire of ego disguised as elegance. Grace looked up at the high ceilings and whispered, "How strange. So much space, so little warmth." Andrew smiled sadly. "That's the world, my dear. People build higher ceilings when they run out of heart." Mia slowed her pace, afraid to intrude on their moment. But Andrew turned to her. "You see, Miss Sanchez, this is why we do what we do. America's losing the meaning of touch. Everything's become digital, distant, disposable." Mia nodded quietly. "I know," she said. "My grandfather was a carpenter. He used to say wood has memory." Grace smiled. He was right. Behind them, Calvin stood in the doorway, pretending to supervise, but really just trying to calculate the damage. He didn't yet know how deep it would go. Kenneth turned back to him, his voice echoing through the room. "You see, Mr. Isham, this meeting isn't about booking space, it's about testing it." "Testing?" Calvin asked weakly. "Yes," Kenneth said, "testing whether integrity can exist under chandeliers." Calvin opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His kingdom of marble suddenly felt like paper. As Kenneth spoke, a ringtone broke the silence. Calvin's private line. The caller ID flashed the name of his regional director, and next to it the words, "Incoming call Kenneth Ford Holdings." The color drained completely from Calvin's face. The reckoning had only begun. The ringtone echoed through the ballroom like a siren only one man could hear. Calvin Isham froze, staring at his phone as if it were evidence in his own trial. He silenced it without answering, his hand trembling slightly before he slipped the device into his jacket pocket. The air had turned heavy, and everyone felt it. Mia, Ryan, the nearby staff who pretended to polish glasses but listened closely, and the guests who lingered by the doors sensing a story was unfolding. Kenneth Ford didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes, calm and unblinking, pinned Calvin where he stood. Andrew Matthews broke the silence first. "Mr. Isham," he said in a voice that carried no anger, only clarity. "You've told us quite a bit about your brand today. Perhaps now you should hear about ours." He gestured toward the folder in Grace's hands. She opened it again, laying out several glossy pages across the reception desk, photos of workshops, apprentices, and restored buildings. "This," she said softly, "is what we do. We rebuild what others forget." Calvin glanced at the papers but didn't move closer. "I see," he said, forcing composure. "A charitable effort. That's admirable." Andrew shook his head. "Not charity, continuity." His voice deepened, gaining quiet power. "When the last craftsman retires and the last trade school closes, you'll realize too late that your luxury has nothing left to stand on." Kenneth stepped forward. "Andrew's organization doesn't ask for donations," he said. "It gives opportunities. Thousands of them. It rebuilds America from the ground up, one workshop, one student, one teacher at a time." He turned toward Calvin, lowering his tone. "And the decision of where to host their national vote was yours to lose." Calvin tried to speak, but the words tangled. "Mr. Ford, I didn't know. If I had been aware—" "That's the point," Kenneth interrupted. "You didn't want to know." Mia stood silently, watching as the man who once embodied everything she feared now looked small, fragile, exposed. Ryan shifted awkwardly behind him, eyes darting between the executives and the staff, realizing too late that he had hitched himself to the wrong conscience. Grace gathered the papers again, stacking them neatly. "We don't need pity, Mr. Isham," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We just needed a room." Calvin exhaled shakily. "Please, allow me to make this right." Andrew met his gaze. "How will you do that? With free champagne? A cheaper rate?" Calvin's lips parted, but nothing came out. Kenneth turned to Mia. "Miss Sanchez, how were these guests treated when they first arrived?" Mia hesitated. Calvin shot her a warning look so sharp it could cut glass. But Kenneth's eyes softened toward her, giving silent permission. She swallowed, finding her courage. "They were dismissed, sir. Mr. Morrell and Mr. Isham both implied they couldn't afford to be here." Calvin hissed, "Mia!" But she didn't stop. "They were polite, kinder than we deserved." A gasp spread quietly through the room, staff, guests, even the pianist by the corner who'd stopped pretending to play. Kenneth nodded once. "Thank you for your honesty." He looked back to Calvin. "You heard her." Calvin's composure cracked. "Mr. Ford, Enough," Kenneth said. "You've spoken enough today." Andrew reached for Grace's hand. "Let's go," he said softly. Grace nodded. "Yes, dear, we've taken enough of their time." But as they turned to leave, Calvin stepped forward, desperation overtaking pride. "Please, Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Matthews, don't go like this. You don't understand the damage this could cause." Andrew paused, looking back at him. "The damage isn't from us, Mr. Isham. It's from what you chose to see when you looked at us." Grace added gently, "You can polish marble all day, but kindness is what keeps it standing." For a moment, even Calvin seemed to grasp the truth of it. His shoulders dropped. He whispered, "You're right." But it was too late. Andrew nodded respectfully to Mia. "Thank you, young lady. You reminded us there's still decency in this place." Grace smiled warmly. "And courage." Mia's throat tightened. "You shouldn't thank me," she said. "I didn't do enough." Andrew's answer was soft but certain. "You did what mattered, you cared." Kenneth looked around the ballroom, at the staff still frozen in shock. "The irony," he said slowly, "is that this hotel was built with union hands, carpenters, masons, painters, people like the ones you just turned away, and now you trade in their memory for glass and vanity." Calvin stood speechless. Ryan stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The chandeliers above flickered faintly, their crystals swaying as if the room itself could feel shame. Kenneth turned to Andrew and Grace. "Let's go. I've already called our partners. There's another location downtown that values integrity more than marble." Andrew smiled faintly. "Then that's where we'll vote," Grace added, "and where we'll remember this lesson." As the trio moved toward the lobby doors, Calvin reached out, a last, useless gesture. "Please don't do this. I can fix it. I can—" Kenneth stopped, turning back once more. "Mr. Isham," he said evenly, "you can't fix what you refuse to see." The doors opened, letting in a rush of cold night air that swept through the room like judgment. The three figures stepped into the snow, their silhouettes fading into the glow of the streetlights. The hush that followed was deeper than silence, it was consequence. Mia watched them go, her heart heavy and awake all at once. She had just witnessed something she would never forget, the moment power bowed to grace. Behind her, Calvin slumped against the counter, whispering, "God help me." Before Mia could respond, the hotel phone rang again. Calvin picked it up with shaking hands, and a voice on the other end said coldly, "This is the board. We need to talk about your behavior right now." Calvin Isham stood frozen behind the front desk, the phone pressed against his ear, the color draining from his face. The voice on the other end of the line was calm but sharp, belonging to the regional director of Ford Holdings. "Mr. Isham," the voice said. "Mr. Isham." Kenneth Ford has just informed us of an incident involving your staff and a pair of distinguished guests. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we continue this discussion with the board? Calvin's mouth went dry. Sir, there must be some misunderstanding. Then you can explain it. The voice interrupted. In person, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. The line went dead. He lowered the receiver, hands trembling. Ryan watched him, pale and wordless. Was that, he began, but Calvin cut him off. Don't speak. His jaw clenched as he straightened his tie, as if tightening it might hold his crumbling authority together. Around them, the lobby had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the staff polishing glasses at the bar were still, watching in uneasy silence. Then, the sound came again, a deep, steady rumble outside, louder now, closer. It was the same car that had arrived earlier, but this time, it wasn't alone. 2 more vehicles pulled up behind it, their headlights cutting sharp lines across the marble floor. The revolving doors turned slowly, deliberately, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The first to enter was Kenneth Ford, his coat still dusted with snow. Behind him came Andrew and Grace Matthews, walking arm in arm, followed by 2 younger assistants carrying briefcases. Every eye in the lobby turned toward them. They weren't guests now, they were an entourage. A statement. The soft piano music faltered as the pianist stopped playing mid-note. Calvin took 1 step back. Good evening, Mr. Isham, Kenneth said. His tone was measured, neither friendly nor hostile, simply final. We're back. Calvin swallowed. Mr. Ford, I didn't expect. I'm sure you didn't, Kenneth said. We came to confirm one thing. Andrew stepped forward, his voice low but unwavering. We'd like to ensure our decision is correctly recorded. The American Craft Heritage Trust will not be holding any of its events, meetings, or partnerships with the Lexington Crown Hotel or any of its affiliates. He paused, letting the words settle. However, we will be sharing why that decision was made. The sentence landed like a hammer. Ryan's hand instinctively gripped the counter. Calvin's lips parted, but no sound came. Grace stepped closer to Mia, who stood still near the lobby pillar, stunned. Young lady, Grace said gently, you were kind to us. Thank you for that. Mia nodded, her eyes bright with a mix of pride and guilt. Kenneth turned to the rest of the staff, his gaze sweeping the room. You all represent something bigger than a building. The way you treat people when you think no one's watching, that's your brand. And tonight, the world will be watching. He handed a sealed envelope to Calvin. This is a written statement of the incident, complete with witness accounts and documentation. It'll go to your ownership board, the press office, and every partner on your sponsorship list. The truth has value, Mr. Isham. I suggest you start learning how to trade in it. Calvin's legs nearly gave out. He took the envelope with shaking hands, his voice cracking. Mr. Ford, please. This will destroy us. Kenneth looked at him with weary pity. No, Mr. Isham, you destroyed yourself the moment you confused courtesy for hierarchy. Ryan stammered. Sir, I didn't mean. Andrew stopped him gently. It's not about what you meant. It's about what you chose. The lobby doors opened again, and cold air swept through as more guests entered, businessmen, journalists, a few curious bystanders drawn by the presence of Kenneth Ford himself. Calvin realized, with a slow, sinking dread, that this humiliation wasn't private anymore. The story was spreading faster than he could contain it. Mia stepped forward, her voice small but firm. Mr. Matthews, she said, before you go, may I ask something? Andrew turned to her kindly. Of course. Why didn't you tell them who you were the first time? Andrew smiled faintly. Because character isn't revealed by who people recognize, it's revealed by how they treat strangers. Grace touched Mia's shoulder softly. And you passed that test, my dear. Mia blinked hard to keep her tears in check. Thank you, she whispered. Kenneth looked toward the doors. Andrew, Grace, it's time. Andrew nodded. Let's go. We have work to do. They turned toward the entrance, moving through the lobby with unhurried grace. Staff and guests stepped aside instinctively, parting like a tide. Calvin tried one last time, his voice trembling. Mr. Ford, please, there must be a way to fix this. Kenneth stopped at the door and looked back over his shoulder. There is, he said. Start treating every guest as if they were me. The words hit harder than any punishment could. And then they were gone out into the snow, their figures swallowed by the glow of the city. Mia stood still long after the doors closed. The snow outside fell in thick, silent flakes, covering the footprints they'd left behind. She didn't know it yet, but that moment those words would change her life forever. The next morning, long before sunrise, Mia's phone rang. The caller ID read, American Craft Heritage Trust. She hesitated for only a second before answering, not knowing that on the other end of the line waited the first chance to rewrite her future. The phone call came just after 5 in the morning. Mia Sanchez woke to the sound, her heart pounding before her mind caught up. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand and answered, her voice groggy. Hello? The woman on the other end spoke clearly, professionally, yet kindly. Good morning, Miss Sanchez. My name is Margaret Lewis, Executive Assistant to Mr. Kenneth Ford. I'm calling on behalf of the American Craft Heritage Trust. Are you available to meet later today? Mia blinked, sitting upright. The trust? You mean Mr. Ford's organization? Yes, Margaret replied. Mr. Ford and Mr. and Mrs. Matthews would like to speak with you personally. They said it's about an opportunity. For a moment, Mia couldn't speak. She looked around her small apartment in Queens, the half-folded laundry, the flickering kitchen light, the life of someone always just surviving. Yes, she said, finding her voice. I can be there, anytime. Margaret smiled through the phone. 2:00 this afternoon. The address will be sent to you shortly. Dress as you are. They prefer authenticity. When the call ended, Mia sat still for a long time, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The city was waking outside, trains rattling, sirens crying, but her world had already shifted. By the time she arrived at the address, the snow had melted into gray slush, and the cold wind stung her face. The building wasn't a skyscraper or a luxury office. It was an old warehouse by the Hudson River, its brick facade painted with the words, American Craft Heritage Trust Apprenticeship Division. Inside, the air smelled of wood, metal, and oil. People were at work everywhere, carpenters sanding frames, welders shaping steel, potters brushing glaze onto clay. It was loud, alive, and honest. Mia felt like she had stepped into another country, a place where people didn't talk about value, they created it. Margaret greeted her warmly and led her through the workshop floor to a quiet conference room upstairs. There, sitting at a long table, were Kenneth Ford, Andrew Matthews, and Grace Matthews. They rose as she entered. Miss Sanchez, Andrew said with that same calm tone she remembered. Thank you for coming. Grace gestured to the seat across from them. Please sit. We wanted to thank you properly. Mia shook her head. You don't have to thank me. I didn't do anything. Kenneth leaned forward, folding his hands. On the contrary, you did what most people in that room couldn't. You saw people, not price tags. Mia looked down. I just couldn't watch it happen. And that, Grace said gently, is the difference between compliance and conscience. Andrew opened a folder on the table and slid a document toward her. We're expanding our outreach. Every year, the Trust selects a handful of individuals who show both integrity and initiative. We want you to join us. Mia blinked. Join? How? Kenneth smiled. We'd like to offer you a position as a project coordinator. You'll be working directly with our craftsman network, helping to organize mentorship programs across the country. Mia's breath caught. I'm not qualified for something like that. Andrew shook his head. Qualification isn't the issue. Heart is. Grace added. You already proved you have it. For a moment, Mia couldn't speak. Her eyes burned as she looked at them. Why me? There must be people more experienced. Kenneth's answer was steady. Because the world doesn't change through experts, it changes through witnesses. The words hit her deeper than she expected. She nodded slowly. If you'll have me, I'll do my best. Andrew smiled. Then it settled. He extended his hand. Welcome to the Trust. They spoke for another hour about the program's mission, about the next vote, and about the nationwide initiative that would soon launch under a federal partnership. The numbers staggered her. Hundreds of training centers, thousands of apprenticeships, tens of millions in funding, all focused on reviving the dignity of work. Kenneth outlined the stakes. If this expansion succeeds, we'll restore the trades and schools and communities that lost them. If it fails, another generation will grow up, believing value only exists on a screen. Grace placed her hand on Mia's. You're the bridge, dear, between the forgotten and the future. Mia nodded, overwhelmed but determined. I won't let you down. Later that night, as she rode the subway home, she kept thinking about Andrew's final words. Every act of kindness is a blueprint for something greater. She realized this wasn't just a new job, it was a second chance to believe in the kind of America her grandfather had built furniture for. Meanwhile, at the Lexington Crown Hotel, Calvin Isham sat in his dark office, reading an official email from corporate headquarters. The subject line was short and brutal: immediate termination of employment ethics violation. His throat tightened. He had lost everything: his position, his reputation, his illusion of control. Ryan had already resigned earlier that day, leaving a single note on the desk. You were right. Respect doesn't pay the lease, but losing it costs everything. Calvin leaned back, staring at the chandelier in his office. It gleamed beautifully, but its light no longer reached him. Outside his window, the city glowed in silence. Somewhere across town, people like Andrew and Grace Matthews were quietly rebuilding the soul of the country he had spent years selling off by the hour. At that same moment, Mia's phone buzzed again. It was Andrew. His message was simple: tomorrow at 8 in the morning, bring your notebook. The first project meeting starts then, and it's much bigger than you think. The next morning, sunlight poured through the old warehouse windows, glinting off the dust suspended in the air like tiny gold flecks. Mia Sanchez arrived early, clutching a new notebook, her nerves buzzing. The floor was already alive with motion: young apprentices lifting lumber, welders tightening bolts, designers sketching blueprints. There was music somewhere in the distance, low and steady, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Mia didn't feel like she was walking into a job. She felt like she was walking into purpose. Andrew Matthews greeted her at the entrance, wearing the same gray suit she remembered, only now he seemed lighter, more at ease. Morning, Miss Sanchez, he said with a warm smile. Ready to see what all the fuss is about? She nodded. More than ready. Grace joined them, handing Mia a small cup of coffee. Drink up, dear, it's strong, you'll need it. They laughed softly together, and for a moment it felt like family and unfamiliar, comforting warmth. Kenneth Ford stood waiting near the conference area. Behind him, a long table was covered in maps, documents, and funding charts. On the wall hung a large board that read, American Craft Heritage Trust National Expansion Proposal, Final Vote. Mia stopped in her tracks. Is this? She began, but Kenneth finished for her. Yes. The same meeting that was supposed to happen at the Lexington Crown. Andrew gestured for her to sit. You might as well see the whole picture now. He opened a folder and slid it toward her. Inside was a single card, the same one Calvin Isham had read before turning pale. On it, embossed in silver, were the words, Andrew Matthews, Executive Director, American Craft Heritage Trust. A public-private partnership for the preservation and advancement of skilled trades. Mia ran her fingers lightly across the lettering. So it's real, she murmured. Andrew smiled faintly. Very real. What started as a handful of volunteers 15 years ago is now a national network of over 10,000 craftspeople, teachers, and apprentices. We work with veterans, at-risk youth, and community colleges. Every dollar we raise goes back into rebuilding American skill, our true infrastructure. Kenneth added, this isn't just about jobs. It's about restoring identity. When we lose the trades, we lose the spine of the country. We forget that every skyscraper, every bridge, every home started with someone's hands. He paused, his gaze steady. And people like Calvin Isham? They forgot that long ago. Mia nodded slowly. So the ballroom wasn't just for a meeting. Andrew shook his head. No, it was a test, not of them but of us. We wanted to see how the world treats dignity when it doesn't come wrapped in money. Grace added softly, most people fail that test, but you didn't. Kenneth handed her another document, an internal memo addressed to major corporate partners and federal agencies. Today we vote on a 3-year expansion across 20 states. The total funding, $300 million. If approved, it will create over 50,000 apprenticeships and restore dozens of closing trade schools. Mia's breath caught. 300 million? Grace nodded. That's the price of believing in hands over headlines. Andrew leaned back in his chair, his tone more reflective now. When we first started this, people laughed. They said manual work was outdated, that machines would replace skill. But machines don't have pride. Machines don't pass down stories. People do. And that's what this vote is about. As the meeting began, representatives from around the country joined via video conference craftsmen with calloused hands, women who ran small upholstery shops, young veterans learning carpentry, teachers from community trade schools. Each face on the screen represented a fragment of something bigger. When the voting started, the atmosphere was electric, each yes, another spark in a growing flame. By the end, the motion passed unanimously. The expansion was approved. Applause filled the room, mixed with laughter and even a few tears. Kenneth shook Andrew's hand. Congratulations, my friend. You just changed the trajectory of a generation. Andrew smiled. We all did. Mia felt her chest tighten with emotion. She realized she was witnessing the very heartbeat of the country. Quiet, humble, relentless. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. This is why we never raised our voices yesterday. True power doesn't shout. It simply stands its ground until others recognize it. Andrew turned toward her. Mia, I want you to head the media outreach. We need someone who understands both humility and impact. Someone who can tell this story truthfully. Mia blinked. Me? Yes, Andrew said simply. You saw what happens when pride meets purpose. Now, you'll make sure the world sees it too. She nodded, tears threatening but held back by resolve. I'll do everything I can. Grace smiled. That's all any of us ever do. The meeting continued for another hour, full of logistical details and deadlines, but Mia's thoughts kept circling back to the hotel lobby, to that moment when she had stood between cruelty and conscience. It had felt so small then, like a flicker against a storm. But now she understood. That was the moment the story had changed. When the meeting ended, Kenneth walked her to the elevator. You did well today, he said. You asked the right questions. That's rarer than you think. Mia smiled nervously. I'm still learning, Kenneth chuckled. Good, the best people never stop. As the elevator doors closed, Mia looked back at the workshop floor one last time. The noise, the light, the motion. It was beautiful chaos. For the first time, she felt she belonged somewhere that mattered. That night, while Mia reviewed her notes at home, an email notification appeared on her laptop. The sender's name froze her. Calvin Isham. The subject line read, I owe you an apology and a request. Mia stared at the glowing subject line on her laptop screen for a long time before opening it. The clock read 9 in the evening, but she wasn't tired. The words felt like static in her head. I owe you an apology and a request. When she finally clicked, the email was short, written in the clipped, formal rhythm of a man unaccustomed to humility. Miss Sanchez, you probably have no reason to read this, but I hope you will. I have been relieved of my position at the Lexington Crown Hotel. I deserved it. I've replayed that day in my head 100 times. The way I spoke to those people, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, and to you. I keep thinking about what Mr. Ford said before he left. You didn't want to know. He was right. I don't know if redemption is possible, but I want to try. Could I meet with you? I need advice, not forgiveness. Calvin Isham. Mia sat back, the hum of the city bleeding faintly through her apartment window. A week ago, she would have deleted the message without hesitation. But now, after witnessing the Matthews' quiet strength, she understood something she hadn't before. Change begins with discomfort. She typed slowly, Mr. Isham, I'll meet you. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, the Trust headquarters. No promises, just a conversation. Mia Sanchez. The next afternoon, Calvin arrived early. He looked nothing like the polished figure who once glided across marble floors. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly loose, his eyes red-rimmed but clearer than before. He carried a single folder, thick with papers. Miss Sanchez, he said quietly when she entered the small conference room. Thank you for seeing me. Mia gestured for him to sit. I didn't do it for you, she said gently. I did it for what comes next. He nodded. Fair enough. He opened the folder and slid a few sheets across the table. These are proposals I wrote years ago, community programs for local schools, internship partnerships. Corporate never approved them, said they weren't profitable enough. But when I saw what the trust is doing, I realized it's the same idea, only done with conviction. Mia skimmed through the pages. They weren't bad structured, practical, almost visionary in parts. "Why didn't you fight for them?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. "Because I wanted to keep my job more than I wanted to keep my soul." Silence settled between them. In the distance, hammers and saws from the workshop downstairs echoed like a heartbeat. Calvin rubbed his temple. "You ever build something that mattered, Miss Sanchez?" She smiled faintly. "I think I'm trying to." He nodded. "Then you understand what I lost. The day Mr. Matthews walked into that hotel, he didn't just remind me I'd failed as a manager. He reminded me I'd failed as a man." Mia closed the folder and leaned forward. "Then start over. Everyone here has." He shook his head. "They'd never take me." "You're wrong," she said quietly. "Mr. Matthews believes in second chances, but it's not my decision to make." As if summoned by the words, the door opened. Andrew and Grace Matthews stepped in, followed by Kenneth Ford. Andrew greeted Calvin with the same calm dignity he had shown the first day. "Mr. Isham," he said, extending his hand. Calvin hesitated, then shook it. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. Andrew smiled faintly. "That's why it matters." Grace sat across from him, her presence soft but firm. "You wrote to Miss Sanchez. That took courage." Calvin lowered his gaze. "Guilt, maybe." "Courage," Grace corrected. "Guilt hides. You showed up." Kenneth remained standing, arms crossed, assessing him. "You asked for advice. Here it is. If you want redemption, earn it in hours, not words." Calvin nodded slowly. "Tell me how." Andrew exchanged a look with Grace, then turned back to him. "We need regional coordinators for new programs, hotels, logistics, hospitality training. We could use someone who understands both sides of that world." Calvin blinked. "You'd trust me with that?" "No," Andrew said. "We'd watch you with that. Trust is something you'll build, one act at a time." For the first time in weeks, Calvin smiled a small, fragile smile, but real. "I'll take it." Kenneth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then welcome to work that pays in peace, not profit." As Calvin left the building, snow had begun to fall again, melting on his coat before he could brush it away. For the first time in years, he didn't rush, he just let it land. Inside, Mia turned to Andrew. "You really think he'll make it?" Andrew shrugged. "I think he'll try, and that's where every good thing starts." Grace added softly. "Besides, the world doesn't need perfect men. It needs changed ones." That evening, as Mia walked through the workshop, she saw Calvin sweeping sawdust alongside two apprentices, his sleeves rolled up, his expensive watch gone. It didn't look like punishment. It looked like peace. She smiled to herself and kept walking. Somewhere in the back of the warehouse, a radio played a slow, hopeful tune, its lyrics lost in the hum of machinery. As Mia turned off the lights at the end of the night, her phone vibrated again, this time from an unfamiliar number. The message read, "Federal Department of Labor request for meeting, American Craft Heritage Trust Grant Evaluation." She stared at it, realizing that the movement she had joined was about to step onto an even bigger stage, and that the fight for integrity was only beginning. The following week arrived like a storm. The message from the Federal Department of Labor had turned into a formal summons. The American Craft Heritage Trust Andrew and Grace's life's work was being called to Washington, D.C. for a congressional evaluation. The stated reason: to determine eligibility for continued federal partnership and funding expansion. But everyone in the office understood what it really meant: scrutiny. Every dollar, every statement, every handshake would be examined. And Mia Sanchez, barely a month into her new role, was asked to help prepare the presentation. The night before the hearing, she sat in the empty workshop, staring at rows of half-finished furniture and metal frames. The air smelled of oil and sawdust, familiar now, grounding. Kenneth Ford approached quietly, his coat draped over his arm. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Mia smiled faintly. "Not really. I've never been to DC before. I'm scared I'll mess something up. Kenneth chuckled softly. Everyone's scared before something real. You'll be fine. You speak from truth. The rest is politics. She nodded. Do you think they'll try to shut us down? He took a deep breath. They won't say it out loud, but if they think we threaten their convenience, yes. The next morning, the Trust's small team gathered at Union Station and took the early train south. Mia sat across from Grace Matthews, who was knitting quietly as the train rocked. You seem calm, Mia said. Grace smiled. Because panic wastes energy, dear. Better to arrive prepared and kind. By the time they reached Washington, the sky had turned gray, the streets slick from recent rain. The Capitol building loomed ahead, austere and imposing. Inside, the hearing room was a cold ocean of polished wood and indifferent faces. A long panel of officials sat at the front, men and women in suits who measured importance in metrics, not meaning. Cameras lined the walls, reporters whispered. The stakes were higher than any meeting Mia had ever witnessed. Andrew Matthews opened the session with his trademark calm. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we're not here to defend a business. We're here to defend a belief that work, when done with dignity, can still build nations. His voice carried through the chamber, steady and deliberate. Our craftspeople don't need pity. They need pathways. We've built them. We just need you not to close them. One of the panelists, a congressman from Ohio, leaned forward. Mr. Matthews, the government already spends billions on education. What makes your program different? Andrew replied without hesitation. Ours doesn't just educate, it restores. We're not handing out diplomas. We're handing back identity. You can't teach pride in a spreadsheet. Murmurs rippled through the room. Another official, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, interjected. And you, Miss Sanchez? You're new to this organization? Mia blinked, surprised to be called. Yes, ma'am, she said. Then tell us, the woman continued. Why should federal taxpayers believe this foundation can create sustainable results? Mia felt the weight of the room shift toward her. Kenneth gave a small nod from the corner. She took a breath. Because I've seen what happens when people are treated like statistics, she said slowly. I used to work in a luxury hotel. We had chandeliers, 5-star ratings, and no heart. One afternoon we turned away a couple who didn't look wealthy enough. That couple turned out to be the people running this program. They didn't get angry, they just left with dignity. And that moment changed my life. The room was silent. Cameras clicked faintly. Mia continued. Now I work here. I've seen ex-soldiers learn carpentry, single mothers learn upholstery, and kids who dropped out of school rebuild their towns. They don't ask for subsidies. They ask for tools, and if that's not worth funding, I don't know what is. Grace smiled quietly from her seat. Andrew's eyes softened. Even the congresswoman leaned back slightly, her pen stilling over her notes. When the session ended, the panel called for a recess. The trust team stepped outside into the marble corridor. Mia leaned against the wall, exhaling for the first time in hours. Did I say too much? She whispered. Kenneth smiled. You said just enough. Later that afternoon, the board reconvened. The chairman, a silver-haired man with a solemn face, adjusted his glasses. We have reviewed your records and testimonies, he announced. This committee recognizes the American Craft Heritage Trust as a critical national partner in vocational revitalization. Funding is renewed 3 years, with an additional $75 million allocated for rural education programs. Gasps and applause filled the chamber. Grace reached for Andrew's hand. Kenneth allowed himself a rare smile. Mia covered her mouth, trying not to cry. The chairman added, You've reminded us that not all infrastructure is built from steel. Some of it's built from character. Outside the building, the rain had stopped. The marble steps gleamed under the sunlight. Cameras flashed as reporters crowded around. Andrew gave a short statement. We didn't come here to win a contract. We came here to prove that integrity still has a place in American business. Mia stood a few feet behind him, watching the crowd, the noise, the energy. For the first time, she felt not like an employee, but a piece of a movement. Grace placed an arm around her shoulders. You did well, dear. I just told the truth, Mia said softly. That's the hardest thing to do, Grace replied. That evening, they took the late train home. The city lights outside the window blurred into long streaks of gold and silver. Mia closed her eyes, exhausted but full. She thought about her grandfather, about the smell of wood and the warmth of creation. Somewhere, she hoped he was proud. When the train pulled into New York, Kenneth's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his brow tightening. "Andrew," he said, his voice suddenly grave. "You need to see this." On the screen was a headline from a major newspaper: "Whistleblower claims misuse of federal funds in craft heritage program investigation pending." The victory wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a new battle. By dawn the next day, the celebration had already curdled into tension. The article had spread overnight across every major outlet: misuse of federal funds. The American Craft Heritage Trust under scrutiny. The story quoted an unnamed former regional advisor, alleging that large sums of grant money were being diverted into private accounts and luxury expenditures. Photos of Andrew Matthews, Grace, and Kenneth Ford appeared beside headlines written in tones that bled accusation more than curiosity. Inside the Trust's headquarters, the air was thick with disbelief and panic. Phones rang without pause. The PR inbox was flooded with interview requests, half of them loaded with venom. Mia stood in the middle of the office as staff argued around her, words like audit, subpoena, resignation flying through the air like shrapnel. Kenneth Ford stood at the center of it all, his posture unbroken, though his jaw was clenched tight. "This is calculated," he said finally. "It's not journalism, it's sabotage." Andrew looked up from the printed article spread on the table. "Then someone close to us did it." Grace's voice was soft but steady. "Who would benefit from destroying us now, just when we finally earned public trust?" No one answered. The silence itself was accusation. Mia stepped closer to the table. "Sir, the story mentions a recently terminated regional advisor. That could mean anyone, but what if it's someone who feels we replace them?" Kenneth frowned. "You're thinking of Calvin." She hesitated. "He was just reinstated as a local coordinator. Maybe someone twisted that." Andrew shook his head. "Calvin wouldn't leak this. He's working in the Bronx office now, and everything he's sent has been transparent." Kenneth leaned over the folder, scanning the supposed evidence attached to the online article, blurred screenshots of bank transfers taken out of context. "These look edited," he muttered. Grace exhaled. "So they're framing us." Andrew nodded slowly. "And whoever did this knew exactly where to hit, right after the congressional approval, before the funds could even arrive." By mid-morning, the first blow came. A federal audit team emailed notice that all incoming funding had been temporarily suspended pending review. The same news broke live on television minutes later. Anchors smiled their practiced smiles as they repeated the phrases "potential corruption" and "investigative oversight." Overnight heroes had become headlines for scandal. Mia sat at her desk, her hands trembling over the keyboard. She kept replaying her own testimony in D.C., hearing her words, "If that's not worth funding, I don't know what is." Now those same words were being clipped and replayed on cable news as part of the controversy reel. "This isn't real," she whispered. Kenneth entered her office, shutting the door behind him. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. "They're twisting everything," he sighed. "They always do when truth starts costing people money." Across the building, Andrew called an emergency meeting. Staff filled the large conference room, their faces pale. "Listen," he said, standing at the head of the table. "This isn't the first time a movement has been attacked. They'll question our integrity because it's easier than confronting their own indifference. But this organization has one advantage they don't. We live in transparency." Mia looked around the room. Every face was a story. A veteran who'd built prosthetics for others like him, a young woman who'd escaped homelessness through the trade program, a former addict who now trained carpentry apprentices. People who had rebuilt their lives here, now terrified it could all vanish with one rumor. Grace rose beside her husband. "If we panic, we lose. If we stay honest, we survive." Kenneth added, "We need to find the leak, quietly, before the investigation does." Andrew nodded. "And while they're searching for villains, we'll keep building, because that's what terrifies them most." That night, the building emptied early. Most of the staff went home in silence, waiting for the next news cycle to hit. Mia stayed late, combing through emails and financial reports. The office was dark except for the blue glow of her monitor. She checked bank statements, project logs, expense reports, everything matched. Until she found one anomaly. A payment from 3 weeks earlier labeled Regional Outreach Grant, Eastern Division. The amount was small, but the destination account didn't match any of the trust's usual vendors. It was a private consulting firm, registered under a name she didn't recognize. She leaned closer to the screen. The listed contact person, Ryan Morrell. Her stomach dropped. The former assistant manager from the Lexington Crown Calvin's subordinate, the one who'd vanished after the hotel fallout. He had filed the transaction just before disappearing. She grabbed her phone and called Kenneth. "I found something," she said quickly. "There's a wire transfer under Ryan Morrell's name. It looks fake, but it uses our internal grant codes." Kenneth's voice was grim. "That's how they did it. They spoofed our system using insider access. Send me everything. Now." She forwarded the files and sat back, her pulse hammering. Outside, thunder rolled over the Hudson, and the workshop lights flickered from the storm. 15 minutes later, Kenneth called back. "You were right. It's Morrell. He's been using fake vendors to create false invoices under the trust's name, then leaking those transactions to the press." "Why would he do that?" Mia asked. Kenneth paused. "Because someone's paying him to." In the silence that followed, the building creaked under the weight of rain. Mia whispered, "We can prove this, right?" Kenneth answered quietly, "Only if we find him before the story buries us." The next morning, Mia arrived to find police vehicles parked outside the trust's building. Agents from the Department of Labor were waiting with search warrants. As she stepped inside, one of them turned toward her and said, "Miss Sanchez, we'll need you to come with us." The fluorescent lights of the federal office were too bright, too sterile, the kind that erased warmth and made every surface look guilty. Mia Sanchez sat at a long metal table across from two agents from the Department of Labor's Inspector General Division. A small recorder blinked red in the center. Her palms were damp, but her voice, when she spoke, was calm. "I already told you everything I know. The funds, the files, the vendors, they're all clean except one, Ryan Morrell's." Agent Larkin, a gray-haired man with a clipped tone, leaned forward. "Miss Sanchez, you're a new employee, correct? Less than 2 months with the trust?" "Yes," Mia replied, "but I've seen the books. Nothing adds up to misuse. The leak came from outside." His partner, Agent Peters, scrolled through a tablet. "The press says otherwise. The documents they published trace directly back to your department." "That's because the leak used my credentials," Mia said, tightening her jaw. "Whoever forged the transfers had access to our internal codes. Ryan Morrell used to work in hospitality under Mr. Isham. He knew the old systems, the patterns, the formatting. It's too clean to be coincidence." The two agents exchanged a look. Larkin pressed a button on the recorder. "For the record, are you implying the trust systems were compromised?" Mia met his gaze. "No, I'm stating it." There was a pause, a long one. Larkin finally said, "If that's true, you'll need to prove it." Back at headquarters, chaos was a constant hum. The trust's accounts were frozen pending investigation, their expansion program suspended indefinitely. Staff members whispered in corners, others cried quietly at their desks. Kenneth Ford was on the phone with legal counsel, while Grace tried to calm frightened apprentices who feared their stipends were gone for good. In the middle of it all, Andrew Matthews sat in his glass-walled office, a lone figure of composure, but his eyes told another story: fatigue, pain, disbelief. When Mia returned, escorted by the agents, he stood immediately. "Is she under arrest?" Larkin shook his head. "Not yet, but we'll need her to stay available." Kenneth stepped forward. "Not yet? What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Peter said, "until we verify her claims, she's still part of the investigation." When the agents left, Mia stood silently by the door. Andrew approached her, voice low. "You okay?" "I will be," she said. "They think I'm the leak." Kenneth muttered, "Of course they do. Whoever's behind this made you the perfect scapegoat." Grace entered quietly, holding a tray with tea, a gesture of calm in a collapsing world. "Sit down, dear," she said softly. "Let's think." They gathered around the small meeting table, papers and laptops scattered like evidence from a crime scene. Mia pulled up her computer. Ryan Morell's digital footprint goes dark after the hotel incident. No LinkedIn, no bank trace, nothing. But look at this. She turned the screen toward them. A map of IP logins lit up with red dots. Someone logged into our finance portal last month from 2 addresses, one in Midtown, one in Arlington, Virginia. Kenneth frowned. That's near D.C. Exactly, Mia said, and the Arlington address is registered to a corporate PR firm, Aegis Strategies. They specialize in political opposition research. Andrew leaned forward. They're the same firm that lobbied against our federal grant last year. Grace whispered, so this wasn't sabotage. It was strategy. Mia nodded. They planted Morell to fabricate the data, then leaked it at the exact moment our funding went public. They needed the story to break before the grants cleared. Kenneth exhaled slowly, his anger tempered by awe. They're weaponizing bureaucracy. Andrew's voice deepened. Then we'll weaponize truth. He stood, suddenly energized. Mia, can you trace those IPs further? Find the server origin? I can try, she said. Do it, he said firmly. If we can prove this leak was orchestrated, we can get our funding reinstated and clear your name. Grace touched his arm. And if we can't? Andrew's jaw set. Then we tell the story ourselves. The truth doesn't need permission. That night, Mia sat alone in her apartment, her laptop glowing in the dark. The city outside was restless horns, sirens, and the hum of sleepless ambition. She followed the digital trail deep into the web, tracing Morell's last known login. It led to a cloud archive hidden under layers of encrypted metadata. Inside, dozens of files appeared: financial spreadsheets, screenshots, and email chains between Morell and someone listed only as E. Connors. The timestamps matched the week before the story leaked. She opened one message. It read, Ryan, once the story breaks, they'll panic. That's when we move to freeze the funds. You'll be compensated as agreed. Afterward, go quiet. E. Connors, Aegis Strategies. Her pulse quickened. There it was, proof. But she needed more. She checked the file properties. The sender's device ID traced back to a private office address in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. She took screenshots, exported the full email chain, and backed up the files to an encrypted drive. Then she called Kenneth. He answered instantly. I have it, she said. The proof. Emails from Aegis Strategies, confirming the setup. Kenneth's tone was calm, almost relieved. Good work. Now you sit tight. Don't send it to anyone yet. Bring it straight to me tomorrow morning. She paused. Shouldn't we send it to the Department of Labor now? No, Kenneth said quickly. We'll handle it carefully. Chain of custody matters. Okay, she agreed, though something in his tone made her uneasy. After they hung up, she sat staring at the glowing monitor. Her gut whispered something wasn't right. Kenneth had sounded controlled, too controlled. And when she replayed the call in her mind, one detail gnawed at her. She hadn't told him the name Aegis Strategies, yet he'd said, good work finding the Aegis link. Her hands went cold. How had he known that name? Mia's phone buzzed again. An anonymous text, no contact ID. It read, Don't trust Ford. He's been working with Aegis all along. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Somewhere outside, a car idled too long beneath her window. The sound of the idling car didn't stop. It lingered, low and constant, like a warning hum beneath the noise of the city. Mia stood frozen by her apartment window, staring through the half-closed blinds. A black sedan was parked across the street. The engine stayed on, exhaust drifting up into the streetlight's pale glow. 2 silhouettes sat inside, unmoving. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. He's deleting files. Don't go to the office. Bring backup somewhere safe. Mia's breath hitched. She looked at her laptop, the screen still glowing with the open Aegis emails. Every instinct told her to run, but her mind clung to one question. Who sent this? She texted back, fingers trembling. Who are you? No reply. After a full minute, the sedan pulled away, its taillights fading into the wet asphalt. The street went quiet again, but the silence felt worse than the noise. She backed away from the window, double-checked her door lock, and grabbed her bag. The flash drive with the Aegis emails was inside, along with a notebook filled with her notes and timestamps. She called Andrew. No answer. Grace, no answer. Finally, she tried Calvin. He picked up on the second ring. "Mia, what's going on?" "They're watching me," she said, her voice low. "I found proof that Aegis set us up. I sent everything to Kenneth, but someone just warned me not to trust him." Calvin went silent. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment. Leave. Now. Go somewhere public. I'll meet you." "Where?" "Grand Central Terminal. Near the clock. 1 hour." The city was half asleep as she boarded the subway. The fluorescent lights flickered. The reflection of her own nervous face in the window looked like a stranger's. She kept one hand in her coat pocket, gripping the flash drive like a talisman. Every stop felt too long. Every person who looked her way seemed to linger too long. When she finally stepped into Grand Central, the vast ceiling made her feel small again, the constellations painted in gold, the echo of 100 conversations bouncing off marble. Calvin was already waiting under the clock, wearing the same worn coat he'd started over in. He looked tired but solid. When he saw her, relief crossed his face. "You made it." "Barely," she said. "I think someone's tracking me." "Show me what you found." They sat on a bench at the edge of the concourse. Mia pulled out her laptop and opened the encrypted folder. Calvin's eyes widened as he scanned the emails. "This is it," he said. "It's enough to prove Morel was working for Aegis. And that they planned the leak right before the grant was approved," she added. He nodded slowly. "We take this to the Department of Labor. Directly. I told Kenneth I'd bring it to him in the morning." Calvin's expression darkened. "Mia. Kenneth Ford was a board advisor for Aegis before he founded the trust. He left them after a merger fight, but that's not something you just walk away from. He still has shares in their parent company." The noise of the terminal seemed to fade around them. "You're saying the message was right." "I'm saying he has motive," Calvin said quietly. "If the trust fails, he can buy its assets through a front nonprofit. It's a way to privatize the entire grant pipeline." Mia's stomach turned. "He wouldn't." Calvin met her eyes. "You've seen how easy it is for men like him to hide ambition behind philanthropy." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. A new text from Kenneth. "Mia, don't panic. Come to the office early. I've secured the evidence safely. Bring your copy, we'll go to the auditors together." Calvin leaned in. "He's trying to get your flash drive." She locked her phone screen. "We'll take it to the investigators first. Then we'll tell Andrew and Grace everything." They left the station together, heading for the nearest taxi stand. Rain had started again, thin and cold. Meanwhile, in a high-rise across Midtown, Kenneth Ford sat alone in his corner office, the city glittering beneath him. The Aegis logo glowed faintly on the monitor in front of him. He typed a message into a secure chat window. "The leak is active. She has the files. Proceed with Phase 2. He stared at the words for a moment before hitting send. His reflection in the glass looked old, weary, and something close to regretful. "I tried to save you, Andrew," he muttered under his breath. "But you made it personal." Back in the taxi, Mia and Calvin rode in silence. The streets blurred by, neon lights and reflections merging in the rain. Calvin finally spoke. "Once we hand this in, it's going to get ugly." "I know," Mia said quietly. "But truth's supposed to be ugly." She looked out the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. "You think people like Ford ever start out evil?" Calvin thought for a long moment. "No, I think they start out believing they can fix the system by playing it. And then one day, they can't tell the difference between the two." The cab turned north, heading toward the federal district. Mia's phone buzzed once more. Another text, no name. "Don't go to the department. They've already been compromised." She showed it to Calvin. His face went pale. "Then where do we go?" She took a deep breath. "To the only people who never stop working when everything else breaks down." "Who?" She smiled faintly. "The press." As their taxi neared the Midtown tunnel, headlights filled the rearview mirror, two black sedans closing fast. Calvin turned, his eyes widening. "They found us." Mia gripped the flash drive tighter. "Then we don't stop." The driver glanced nervously at them. The city lights vanished as they entered the tunnel, the sound of engines echoing like a chase through a hollow steel throat. The tunnel swallowed them whole. The world outside its lights, its noise, its rules vanished behind thick concrete walls that roared with the sound of engines. The cab's interior filled with the hum of tires, the faint smell of exhaust, and the thumping heartbeat of fear that Mia could almost hear in her ears. The driver, a wiry man with dark eyes and a heavy accent, glanced into the rearview mirror. "Those cars behind us, friends of yours?" Calvin twisted in his seat to look. The two black sedans were barely 20 yards back, headlights glaring through the tunnel haze. "No," he said sharply. "Step on it." The driver frowned. "Lady, this isn't a raceway." Mia leaned forward, voice trembling. "Please, just get us out of this tunnel. Fast." The cab accelerated, its tires screeching slightly on the slick concrete. The sedans followed, matching speed effortlessly. Calvin watched them in the mirror. "They're trained," he muttered. "That's formation driving." "Trained?" Mia's voice cracked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, the backup copy of her files. "If something happens, you take this," he said, "and you run." "What? Why do you have a copy?" "I made one when you showed me the emails at Grand Central. Call it insurance." The first sedan surged closer, its grille nearly kissing the cab's rear bumper. The driver cursed in Spanish. "What the hell is this?" "Keep going," Calvin said. "Don't slow down for anything." The tunnel curved ahead. The light flickered, casting shadows that stuttered like a broken film reel. The second sedan moved to the left, pulling alongside. Its tinted window lowered just enough for Mia to glimpse a face expressionless, calm, wearing an earpiece, a hand lifted, palm outward. The driver's hand signal. "Stop the car." "Don't," Calvin warned. "They're not cops." The cab swerved slightly as the first sedan clipped its rear corner. The impact jolted them hard, tossing Mia sideways against the door. She clutched the bag with the flash drive, gasping. "They're trying to stop us." "No," Calvin said grimly. "They're trying to make it look like an accident." Ahead, the tunnel lights began to brighten an exit. They were almost out. "Driver!" Calvin shouted. "Take the next ramp right. Don't stop until you hit daylight." "You better tip big!" the driver yelled, slamming the gas. The cab burst out of the tunnel into the chaos of midtown traffic, horn blasts and flashing lights colliding with daylight. The sedans emerged right behind them. "Where now?" the driver yelled. "Times Square," Mia said without thinking. "Crowds. Cameras. They won't risk exposure there." "Times Square it is." The cab veered left onto 42nd Street, weaving between cars. The sedans followed but kept distance now, shadowing instead of striking. "They're waiting," Calvin said. "They know we'll stop somewhere." Mia's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "You're almost there. Look for the news van parked at 45th and Broadway. Tell them you have the Aegis files. They'll listen." She showed Calvin the screen. He nodded. "That's our out." The taxi screeched to a halt near 45th. Tourists screamed, horns blared, and camera flashes popped as they jumped out into the chaos of Times Square. Neon lights bathed everything in electric blue and red. The smell of rain and exhaust filled the air. "There," Mia shouted. A white van with the logo 4 was parked near the red steps, its back doors open. Two crew members were unloading equipment. Calvin grabbed her arm. "Go, I'll distract them." "No." "Go, Mia. This story's bigger than me, bigger than any of us. Get it out before they bury it." He shoved the USB into her hand and turned toward the street, moving fast, deliberately into the open. The sedan stopped half a block away. One of the doors opened. Calvin raised his hand slightly, feigning surrender, drawing their attention. Mia sprinted through the crowd, weaving between pedestrians and street performers, her breath sharp and shallow. She reached the van and slammed the side panel. "I need to speak to your producer. Right now, it's about Aegis Strategies and a federal fraud case." The reporter, a young woman with a press badge, blinked. "Who are you?" Mia thrust the flash drive toward her. "Someone who can prove everything." Behind her, a scream cut through the noise. "Calvin." She spun around just in time to see two men forcing him into the back of a sedan before the door slammed shut. The cars sped off, merging into the river of traffic, gone in seconds. Mia froze, her lungs refusing air. The reporter grabbed her shoulder. "Hey, Are you okay? Mia turned, eyes wild. You have to get this on air now, before they find me too. An hour later, the footage hit the network. The headline scrolled across national screens. Whistleblower claims corporate manipulation of federal grant program names Aegis Strategies. Within minutes, the story spread across every major outlet. Aegis denied everything. Kenneth Ford released a carefully worded statement calling the allegations an unfortunate misunderstanding. But the damage was done. The files were out. The truth was public. And somewhere in the city, Calvin Isham was gone. Mia sat in a safe house arranged by the network, staring at the glow of her phone. Her reflection looked older now, harder. She had crossed a line she couldn't return from. Grace's text arrived late that night. We saw it. Andrew's proud of you. But be careful, Kenneth won't go down quietly. Mia looked out the window at the city below. For the first time, she realized how deep this went, how many people had built empires on the illusion of integrity. She wasn't just part of a story anymore. She was the story. Her phone rang again. An unknown voice spoke on the other end, low and composed. Miss Sanchez, if you want to see Calvin Isham alive, bring the originals, midnight, Pier 31. Then the line went dead. The rain came sideways that night, driven by wind that smelled of iron and sea. Pier 31 sat on the far edge of the Hudson, half abandoned, half alive with the quiet pulse of the river. Old cranes loomed against the skyline like fossils, and the water below slapped rhythmically against the pylons. Mia stood at the edge of the dock, coat soaked through, one hand clutching the flash drive, the other trembling inside her pocket. Her phone's last message still burned on the screen. Come alone. She had told no one, not the reporters, not Grace, not Andrew. Because if they were listening, as the voice on the phone implied, bringing anyone else would get Calvin killed. She checked her watch. 11:59. Thunder rolled somewhere far upriver. Then, through the mist, headlights appeared, two beams cutting through the rain, bouncing off the wet concrete. A black sedan crept down the dock, slow, deliberate, tires hissing. It stopped 10 feet from her. The engine idled, a door opened, and two men stepped out, their suits dark against the storm. One of them held an umbrella, the other something worse, a phone, screen-lit, showing a live video feed. Calvin Isham, tied to a chair, bruised but alive. Miss Sanchez, one of them said, voice smooth, faintly accented. You've caused quite a storm. Where is he? She demanded. Safe for now. You have something we need. She raised the flash drive slightly. You mean this? The man smiled thinly. Smart girl. You didn't send the originals. Aegis appreciates caution. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a second. Mia recognized him, Kenneth Ford's former security chief. You work for Ford, she said. He didn't deny it. Mr. Ford made mistakes. You're about to make one too. Where's Ford now? Preparing for his statement tomorrow morning. He'll deny everything, of course, but first he needs the files destroyed. Mia's mind spun. He's silencing Calvin because Calvin knows too much. The man shrugged. Collateral cleanup. You'd be surprised how often truth requires editing. She swallowed hard. You release him first, then I'll give you the drive. He chuckled softly. That's not how this works. Behind him, the second man opened the trunk and took out a small steel case. He set it on the hood and flipped it open. Inside lay stacks of $100 bills neatly bundled, rain-slick, absurd under the pale light. $500,000, the man said. Enough to start over anywhere. You drop this obsession, you walk away alive. Nobody gets hurt, Mr. Isham included. Mia stared at the money, then at the phone screen showing Calvin's frightened eyes. For a moment, she felt the weight of exhaustion pressing against her ribs, weeks of fear, loss, and betrayal. It would be so easy to end it here, just hand over the drive, walk away, pretend truth didn't matter. But she saw Calvin's face again, heard Andrew's voice in her head. Integrity isn't what you preach, it's what you refuse to sell. She lifted her chin. I'm not for sale. The man sighed. Pity. He gestured to the second guard. End it. The second man reached inside his coat, but before he could draw, headlights flared at the far end of the pier. A van's horn blared a long, defiant note. The WNYT News 4 logo shone through the mist. Reporters spilled out with cameras, microphones, and floodlights blazing. "Miss Sanchez," one shouted, "is this where they're holding your whistleblower source?" The agents froze. The first man cursed under his breath. "You called them?" Mia shook her head. "I didn't have to. They tracked my GPS when I left the safe house." The nearest camera zoomed in, the red recording light flashing. "Smile," she said. "You're live." The guard hesitated, then lunged forward, grabbing for the flash drive. Mia ducked, the two men colliding briefly in the chaos. The drive flew from her hand, skittering across the wet dock. She dove after it, fingers closing around the metal just as a shot rang out loud, close, cracking through the storm. The sound made everyone freeze. When she looked up, Kenneth Ford stood there. He had stepped out of the sedan, gun in hand, rain dripping off his coat, eyes cold. "Enough," he said. "You want the truth, Miss Sanchez? The truth is leverage. The world doesn't want honesty, it wants control. And I gave it both." Mia stood slowly, clutching the drive. "You built the trust to save people. What happened to you?" "I built it to test people," Ford said. "And they failed. Every one of them. Even Andrew." "No," she said quietly. "You failed yourself." Behind her, a camera light snapped on full beam, illuminating Ford's face in brilliant white. The network was broadcasting live. Every word, every glare, every gesture. "Mr. Ford," one reporter shouted, "do you deny your connection to Aegis Strategies?" Ford turned, saw the cameras, and in that split second of panic, lowered his gun. The guards backed away. Sirens wailed in the distance closer, faster. Ford's expression hardened into resignation. "You think this will save you?" he said softly. "They'll replace me by morning." "Maybe," Mia said, "but at least everyone will know who you were when the lights were on." Police cars burst through the pier gates, blue and red lights reflecting off the water. Officers swarmed the dock, weapons drawn. Ford didn't resist. He dropped the gun and raised his hands as they surrounded him. The guards were pulled aside. Cameras captured everything: the arrest, the handcuffs, the storm. Mia stood motionless, drenched and shaking, the flash drive still in her hand. The reporters closed in, questions flying, lights blinding. She could barely hear them. All she saw was Calvin, being led from another car nearby, alive but weak, nodding faintly at her through the rain. Relief flooded her chest like warmth after frostbite. As Ford was placed into the police car, he looked back at her one last time, rain streaking down his face. "You think you've won," he said quietly, "but you have no idea how deep this goes." Hours later, long after the pier had emptied and the cameras had gone, Mia sat in a hospital waiting room beside Calvin. A television on the wall replayed footage of Ford's arrest. Then the screen flickered, breaking news. The anchor's voice was grim. "Multiple financial institutions have confirmed that Aegis Strategies was not acting alone. Leaked records suggest ties to senior federal officials within the Department of Labor itself. The investigation is now expanding nationwide." Mia stared at the screen, the truth hitting harder than any bullet. Ford was right. The real war hadn't even begun. The rain came sideways that night, driven by wind that smelled of iron and sea. Pier 31 sat on the far edge of the Hudson, half abandoned, half alive with the quiet pulse of the river. Old cranes loomed against the skyline like fossils, and the water below slapped rhythmically against the pylons. Mia stood at the edge of the dock, coat soaked through, one hand clutching the flash drive, the other trembling inside her pocket. Her phone's last message still burned on the screen: "Come alone." She had told no one, not the reporters, not Grace, not Andrew, because if they were listening as the voice on the phone implied, bringing anyone else would get Calvin killed. She checked her watch. 11:59. Thunder rolled somewhere far upriver. Then, through the mist, headlights appeared, two beams cutting through the rain, bouncing off the wet concrete. A black sedan crept down the dock, slow, deliberate, tires hissing. It stopped 10 feet from her. The engine idled. A door opened, and two men stepped out, their suits dark against the storm. One of them held an umbrella, the other something worse. A phone, screen lit, showing a live video feed. Calvin Isham, tied to a chair, bruised but alive. "Miss Sanchez," one of them said, voice smooth, faintly accented, "you've caused quite a storm." "Where is he?" she demanded. "Safe for now. You have something we need." She raised the flash drive slightly. "You mean this?" The man smiled thinly. "Smart girl. You didn't send the originals." Aegis appreciates caution. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a second. Mia recognized him, Kenneth Ford's former security chief. "You work for Ford," she said. He didn't deny it. "Mr. Ford made mistakes. You're about to make one too." "Where's Ford now?" "Preparing for his statement tomorrow morning. He'll deny everything, of course. But first, he needs the files destroyed." Mia's mind spun. He's silencing Calvin because Calvin knows too much. The man shrugged. "Collateral cleanup. You'd be surprised how often truth requires editing." She swallowed hard. "You release him first, then I'll give you the drive." He chuckled softly. "That's not how this works." Behind him, the second man opened the trunk and took out a small steel case. He set it on the hood and flipped it open. Inside lay stacks of $100 bills neatly bundled, rain-slick, absurd under the pale light. $500,000, the man said. "Enough to start over anywhere. You drop this obsession, you walk away alive. Nobody gets hurt, Mr. Isham included." Mia stared at the money, then at the phone screen showing Calvin's frightened eyes. For a moment she felt the weight of exhaustion pressing against her ribs, weeks of fear, loss, and betrayal. It would be so easy to end it here. Just hand over the drive, walk away, pretend truth didn't matter. But she saw Calvin's face again, heard Andrew's voice in her head. "Integrity isn't what you preach, it's what you refuse to sell." She lifted her chin. "I'm not for sale." The man sighed. "Pity." He gestured to the second guard. "End it." The second man reached inside his coat, but before he could draw, headlights flared at the far end of the pier. A van's horn blared a long, defiant note. The WNYT News 4 logo shone through the mist. Reporters spilled out with cameras, microphones, and floodlights blazing. "Miss Sanchez," one shouted. "Is this where they're holding your whistleblower source?" The agents froze. The first man cursed under his breath. "You called them?" Mia shook her head. "I didn't have to. They tracked my GPS when I left the safe house." The nearest camera zoomed in, the red recording light flashing. "Smile," she said. "You're live." The guard hesitated, then lunged forward, grabbing for the flash drive. Mia ducked, the two men colliding briefly in the chaos. The drive flew from her hand, skittering across the wet dock. She dove after it, fingers closing around the metal just as a shot rang out loud, close, cracking through the storm. The sound made everyone freeze. When she looked up, Kenneth Ford stood there. He had stepped out of the sedan, gun in hand, rain dripping off his coat, eyes cold. "Enough," he said. "You want the truth, Miss Sanchez? The truth is leverage. The world doesn't want honesty, it wants control. And I gave it both." Mia stood slowly, clutching the drive. "You built the trust to save people. What happened to you?" "I built it to test people," Ford said, "and they failed. Every one of them, even Andrew." "No," she said quietly. "You failed yourself." Behind her, a camera light snapped on full beam, illuminating Ford's face in brilliant white. The network was broadcasting live. Every word, every glare, every gesture. "Mr. Ford," one reporter shouted, "do you deny your connection to Aegis Strategies?" Ford turned, saw the cameras, and in that split second of panic, lowered his gun. The guards backed away. Sirens wailed in the distance closer, faster. Ford's expression hardened into resignation. "You think this will save you?" he said softly. "They'll replace me by morning." "Maybe," Mia said, "but at least everyone will know who you were when the lights were on." Police cars burst through the pier gates, blue and red lights reflecting off the water. Officers swarmed the dock, weapons drawn. Ford didn't resist. He dropped the gun and raised his hands as they surrounded him. The guards were pulled aside. Cameras captured everything: the arrest, the handcuffs, the storm. Mia stood motionless, drenched and shaking, the flash drive still in her hand. The reporters closed in, questions flying, lights blinding. She could barely hear them. All she saw was Calvin, being led from another car nearby, alive but weak, nodding faintly at her through the rain. Relief flooded her chest like warmth after frostbite. As Ford was placed into the police car, he looked back at her one last time, rain streaking down his face. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But you have no idea how deep this goes." Hours later, long after the pier had emptied and the cameras had gone, Mia sat in a hospital waiting room beside Calvin. A television on the wall replayed footage of Ford's arrest. Then the screen flickered breaking news. The anchor's voice was grim. "Multiple financial institutions have confirmed that Aegis Strategies was not acting alone. Leaked records suggest ties to senior federal officials within the Department of Labor itself. The investigation is now expanding nationwide." Mia stared at the screen, the truth hitting harder than any bullet. Ford was right. The real war hadn't even begun.